Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Walter Rollins stood in his mahogany-paneled office, gazing out at the Seattle skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. At 48, he possessed the quiet confidence of a man who had built something meaningful from nothing. His construction empire, Rollins Development, had transformed the city's landscape over the past 2 decades. Unlike his flashier competitors, Walter preferred substance over showmanship. "Mr. Rollins?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your wife called. She wants to know if you've made the resort reservations yet." Walter's jaw tightened slightly. Paige Rollins had been increasingly demanding lately, treating their 20-year marriage more like a business arrangement than a partnership. At 44, she maintained her beauty through expensive treatments and designer clothes, but her warmth had long since cooled into calculating ambition. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. When they'd met at University of Washington, Paige Krause had been a psychology major with dreams of helping children. Walter, studying civil engineering, had fallen for her compassionate nature. But somewhere between his first million and his 10th, she'd changed. The woman who once packed bag lunches for his construction crews now wouldn't be caught dead at a job site. Their children reflected this shift. Megan, now 22, had inherited her mother's sense of entitlement without any of her early charm. A recent graduate from an expensive private college, she seemed to view her father as nothing more than a walking ATM. Bobby, 19, showed more promise, but had fallen under his mother and sister's influence since starting at Stanford. Walter's phone buzzed with a text from his brother-in-law, Nathan Bailey. "Family dinner tonight. Paige insists you be there by 7 sharp. Don't be late like last time." Nathan had married Paige's sister Rachel 5 years ago, and somehow had appointed himself as the family's unofficial spokesperson. The man had never held a real job, living off Rachel's inheritance and Walter's generosity, yet he acted as though he ran the show. Walter pocketed his phone and walked to his safe, retrieving a thick folder marked Personal, Confidential. Inside were financial records, private investigator reports, and photographs that painted a very different picture of his family than the one presented at dinner parties. For months, he'd been quietly gathering information, not out of paranoia, but because something felt wrong. Paige's mysterious girls' trips to Portland. Megan's excessive spending that seemed to exceed even her considerable allowance. Nathan's sudden interest in Walter's business operations. The private investigator, Gabriel Gregory, had been thorough. The photographs showed Paige at expensive restaurants with Ivan Charles, a real estate developer and Walter's former business partner, who tried to undercut him on several major projects. The financial records revealed Nathan had been discussing Walter's assets with divorce attorneys, claiming to represent family interests. But it was the conversation Gabriel had recorded that cut deepest. Megan, laughing with her friends at an upscale cafe. "Dad thinks we actually love him. It's pathetic how desperate he is for approval. Mom says once the divorce goes through, we'll get enough to never have to pretend to care about his boring construction stories again." Walter closed the folder. Tomorrow, they would leave for Maui. A family vacation Paige had demanded to reconnect before Bobby returned to college. She'd insisted on the most expensive resort, first-class flights for everyone, and adjoining suites. All paid for by the man they secretly mocked. He'd agreed to everything, even added some special touches of his own. After all, this would be a trip none of them would ever forget. Chapter 2. The Gathering Storm. The Rollins family gathered at Seattle-Tacoma Airport's first-class lounge, a picture of American success. Walter watched his family with new eyes, noting details he'd previously overlooked. Paige wore a designer outfit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, constantly checking her reflection in her phone's camera. She'd barely acknowledged Walter's arrival, instead holding court with her sister Rachel and Nathan, discussing the resort's amenities as though they'd paid for the trip themselves. "Walter, darling," Paige's voice carried that saccharine tone she used when she wanted something. "I hope you upgraded our accommodations. The penthouse suite would be more appropriate for a family of our stature." Before Walter could respond, Nathan interjected with his usual presumption. Actually, I took the liberty of calling the resort. They're holding the presidential villa for us, but it requires a significant deposit. I told them you'd handle it, Walter. Walter's expression remained neutral. I see. And you felt comfortable making financial commitments on my behalf because... The question hung in the air. Nathan's face reddened slightly. Well, we're family. I thought. You thought wrong. Walter's voice carried an edge that made Nathan step back. I've already made arrangements. Megan looked up from her phone, irritated. Dad, don't be difficult. We need proper accommodations for the photos. This vacation is going on all our social media accounts. Of course it is, Walter murmured, pulling out his phone. He'd received a text from Gabriel Gregory. Package delivered as requested. Everything is in place. Bobby emerged from the bar area, slightly unsteady. At 19, he developed his mother's taste for expensive alcohol and his uncle's sense of entitlement. Hey, Pop, he slurred slightly, using the diminutive nickname that had once been endearing but now felt mocking. Mom says you're being cheap about the hotel. Come on, don't embarrass us. Walter studied his youngest child. When had Bobby stopped calling him Dad? When had casual conversation become veiled insults? Rachel, who'd been quietly observing, finally spoke. Walter, you work so hard. This vacation should be about relaxing and enjoying family time. Maybe you could try to be more flexible. The irony wasn't lost on him. Rachel, who lived in a house Walter had bought, drove a car he'd paid for, and sent her children to private schools on his dime, was lecturing him about flexibility. Flexibility, Walter repeated thoughtfully. Interesting choice of words, Rachel. His phone buzzed with a flight announcement. As they gathered their belongings, Walter noticed Paige typing furiously on her phone, her face flushed. When she caught him watching, she quickly put it away. Just confirming our spa appointments, she said quickly. Walter nodded, though Gabriel's reports had detailed her real communications. Ivan Charles would be in Maui the same week, staying at a resort just 15 minutes away. Paige's spa appointments were actually elaborate cover stories for their rendezvous. As they boarded the plane, the flight attendant greeted Walter by name. Mr. Rollins, welcome aboard. Your family is in seats 2A through 2F, and we've prepared everything as you requested. Paige's eyes lit up at the first-class treatment, but Walter caught the subtle exchange between her and Nathan, a look that suggested they'd expected no less. During the flight, Walter observed his family with the detachment of an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. They talked around him, not to him. Megan complained about her friend's pathetic family vacations, while Bobby boasted about his fraternity's expensive spring break plans, which Walter would undoubtedly fund. Nathan regaled them with stories of business deals he'd supposedly orchestrated, carefully omitting that Walter's connections had made them possible. Paige played the gracious matriarch, accepting praise for their lifestyle while never acknowledging its source. As the plane descended toward Maui, Walter felt a strange sense of calm. The folder in his briefcase contained more than just evidence of betrayal. It contained a blueprint for justice. Gabriel Gregory had helped him craft something far more elegant than a simple confrontation. Tomorrow would begin the final act of a drama that had been building for years. His family thought they were headed for paradise. Walter knew better. They were flying toward a reckoning. Chapter 3. Paradise Lost. The Grand Wailea Resort sprawled before them like a golden temple, its luxury evident in every gleaming surface and manicured palm tree. Walter had spared no expense. The resort cost $2,000 per night per suite, and he'd booked for adjoining accommodations for a week-long stay. As their limousine pulled up to the main entrance, Paige immediately began orchestrating the arrival like a film director. Bobby, fix your hair. Megan, put your phone away for 30 seconds. Nathan, help with the luggage. Walter, try to look successful. The last comment stung, though Walter kept his expression neutral. He'd built an empire worth over $50 million, employed 300 people, and single-handedly funded his family's extravagant lifestyle. Yet somehow, he needed to look successful. The resort manager, Glenn Porter, greeted them personally. Mr. Rollins, welcome to Grand Wailea. We prepared everything exactly as you specified. Your family's accommodations are ready, and we've arranged the special services you requested. Walter shook Glenn's hand firmly. Thank you. I trust the modifications to my reservation were processed correctly? Absolutely, sir. Everything is precisely as you ordered yesterday evening. Paige's eyes narrowed slightly at this private exchange, but she was quickly distracted by the opulent surroundings. The resort's lobby featured marble floors, cascading waterfalls, and art worth millions of dollars. It was exactly the kind of conspicuous luxury that impressed his family. As they approached the check-in desk, Paige took charge. We'll need 4 adjoining suites, presidential level, of course. My husband can handle the financial arrangements. The desk clerk, a polite young woman named Dee, smiled professionally. Of course, Mrs. Rollins. Mr. Rollins called yesterday with some modifications to your arrangements. Let me pull up your reservations. Walter watched his family's faces as Dee explained their accommodations. The children seemed satisfied. Nathan appeared appropriately impressed, and Paige glowed with the kind of pride that came from displaying wealth she hadn't earned. After settling into their rooms, the family gathered for dinner at the resort's most expensive restaurant. The private dining room overlooked the ocean, and the sommelier had selected wines that cost more per bottle than most people's weekly salary. It was during the second course that the conversation took its predictable turn. Dad, Megan began, her voice carrying that patronizing tone she perfected. We need to talk about the photos for this trip. I mean, you understand this is going to be all over our social media, right? Our friends are watching. I see, Walter replied carefully. And what concerns you about photos? Bobby laughed, slightly drunk from the expensive wine. Come on, Pop. You know what she means. You're not exactly photogenic. Maybe you could just take the photos instead of being in them. Paige nodded approvingly. The children have a point, Walter. You tend to look rather stern in pictures. Perhaps it would be better if you handled the camera work. You're quite good with technical things. Nathan leaned forward conspiratorially. Besides, Walter, this is really about the kids and their memories. You'll have plenty of other opportunities for photos. The conversation continued, each family member adding their perspective on why Walter should remain behind the camera rather than in front of it. They discussed his appearance, his tendency to ruin the mood with his serious demeanor, and his general inability to contribute to the fun, relaxed atmosphere they wanted to project. Walter listened in silence, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. His family interpreted this as agreement, but he was actually memorizing every word for future reference. After dinner, as they prepared to return to their rooms, Paige made her final announcement. Tomorrow we start the real vacation. Walter, I think it would be best if you just stayed in your room when we're doing family activities. You can handle any business calls or whatever it is you do. We'll take it from here. Megan nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. You just ruined the family photos anyway, Dad. It's better for everyone this way. Walter looked around the table at his wife and children. The people he'd worked 18-hour days to support, sacrificed his own dreams to elevate, and loved unconditionally despite their growing coldness. I understand, he said quietly. You'll take it from here. As they walked back through the resort's elegant corridors, Walter felt a strange sense of liberation. His family had finally said out loud what they'd been thinking for years. They didn't want him, they wanted his money. Tomorrow, they would learn the difference between the two. Chapter 4. The Reckoning. Walter woke at 5 a.m. to the sound of waves crashing against the resort's private beach. He'd barely slept, but not from anxiety, from anticipation. Today would be the first day of the rest of his life. He dressed carefully in his best casual attire and walked to the resort's business center, where Glenn Porter was waiting with a folder of documents. Mr. Rollins, Glenn said quietly, everything is prepared as you requested. The penthouse suite is ready, and we've made the other arrangements. Are you certain you want to proceed? Walter opened the folder and reviewed the paperwork one final time. Hotel bills, reservation changes, legal documents prepared by his attorney Dustin Thornton, and a detailed timeline of actions Gabriel Gregory had helped orchestrate. I'm certain, Walter replied. Initiate the changes immediately. At 9 a.m., Walter knocked on the door of the family's main suite, where they were preparing for their first day of real vacation. Paige answered, wearing a designer sundress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Walter," she said with barely concealed annoyance, "we discussed this last night. We'll handle the vacation activities. You can just relax in your room." "Actually," Walter said calmly, "we need to talk. All of you." Something in his tone made Paige step back. Walter entered the suite, where Megan, Bobby, Nathan, and Rachel were gathered around a breakfast spread that would feed a small army. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night," Walter began, his voice steady and controlled. "About how I'd ruin the family photos, how I should stay in my room, how you'll take it from here." Megan rolled her eyes. "Dad, don't be dramatic. We're just trying to have a good vacation." "I agree completely," Walter said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "In fact, I've decided to take your advice. You can absolutely take it from here." Before anyone could respond, Walter pulled out his phone and made a call. "Glenn, please proceed with the changes we discussed." Paige's face showed the first hint of concern. "Walter, what changes? What are you talking about?" Walter pocketed his phone and looked at each family member in turn. "Well, since you've made it clear that you don't want me participating in this family vacation, and since you feel perfectly capable of handling everything yourselves, I've made some adjustments." "What kind of adjustments?" Nathan demanded, his voice taking on the aggressive tone he used when he felt his lifestyle threatened. "Simple ones," Walter replied. "I've canceled your reservations." The silence that followed was deafening. Paige's face went white. "You've what?" "Canceled your reservations." Walter enunciated each word clearly. "This morning at 8 a.m., to be precise. You have until noon to vacate the suites." Bobby jumped up from his chair, knocking over his mimosa. "You can't do that. This is our vacation." "Actually," Walter said, producing a document from his jacket, "I could do exactly that. Since I'm the one paying for everything, and since you've made it clear you don't want me here, I thought you might prefer to handle your own accommodations." Megan's voice rose to a near shriek. "This is insane. You can't just abandon us in Hawaii." Walter's expression remained calm, but his voice carried a steel edge. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm giving you exactly what you asked for, complete control over your vacation experience. You said you'd take it from here, so take it." Rachel, who had been silent, finally found her voice. "Walter, be reasonable. Where are we supposed to stay?" "That's not my concern anymore," Walter replied. "I'm sure you'll figure something out. After all, you're all intelligent, capable adults who've been making decisions about this family for quite some time." Nathan stood up, trying to assert authority he'd never actually possessed. "Now wait just a minute, Walter. This is ridiculous. You're acting like a child." Walter turned to face Nathan directly, and for the first time, his mask of calm slipped slightly. "A child, Nathan? Is that what you think I am? Let me ask you something. When exactly did you decide you were entitled to make financial decisions for my family?" "I was just trying to help." "Help?" Walter's voice cut through Nathan's excuse. "By calling divorce attorneys behind my back? By discussing my assets with strangers? By treating me like an ATM while plotting to remove me from my own family?" The color drained from Nathan's face. Around the room, the other family members exchanged glances of panic and confusion. Paige's voice was barely a whisper. "How do you know about? About Ivan Charles? About your secret meetings? About the house you've been looking at in Portland?" Walter pulled out his phone and showed them a series of photographs. "Professional investigators are very thorough, Paige. Gabriel Gregory has documented everything." The room erupted in simultaneous voices, denials, excuses, and accusations flying in every direction. Walter waited for the chaos to subside before speaking again. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice cutting through their protests. "You have 2 hours to pack your belongings and check out. I've booked myself the penthouse suite for the remainder of the week. Your return flights are still valid, so you can go home whenever you choose." "But where are we supposed to stay?" Megan demanded, tears streaming down her face. Walter walked to the window and pointed down the coast. "There's a motel about 15 minutes down the road. The Maui Budget Inn. It's clean, safe, and affordable. Perfect for people who want to handle their own vacation arrangements." As he walked toward the door, Paige called out desperately, "Walter, please. We could talk about this." We can work things out. Walter paused without turning around. 20 years ago, we could have worked things out. 10 years ago, we could have worked things out. Last night, when you told me I'd ruin your photos and should stay in my room, we could have worked things out. You turned to face them one final time. But this morning, when I offered you the chance to take it from here, that conversation ended. You don't treat the person paying for your paradise like an outcast. Not anymore. Walter left the suite and walked directly to the concierge desk, where Glenn Porter was waiting with a key card and a smile. The penthouse is ready, Mr. Rollins. Will there be anything else you need? Walter accepted the key card and looked back toward the suites where his family was frantically trying to process their new reality. Actually, he said with the first genuine smile he'd worn in years, I think I have everything I need. Chapter 5. The Power of Solitude. The penthouse suite occupied the entire top floor of the Grand Wailea's main tower, offering panoramic views of the Pacific Ocean and the West Maui Mountains. Walter stood on the private terrace, sipping coffee that cost more than most people spend on groceries, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years: peace. His phone had been buzzing constantly since noon. Calls from Paige, Nathan, even Bobby, but he'd let them all go to voicemail. He would listen to them eventually, but not today. Today was about recalibration. Glenn Porter knocked on the door at 2 p.m., accompanied by a young woman Walter didn't recognize. Mr. Rollins, Glenn said professionally, this is Alice Eaton, our guest relations manager. She wanted to personally ensure your comfort during your stay. Alice stepped forward with a warm smile. Mr. Rollins, we're honored to have you as our guest. Your family appear to have some difficulties this morning. Is there anything we can do to enhance your experience? Walter appreciated the discretion. Hotel staff had undoubtedly witnessed the earlier drama, but Alice's professionalism was impeccable. Actually, yes, Walter said. I'd like to make some additional reservations. Dinner tonight at Homohomanukanu Kwapoe, the private dining room. And tomorrow, I'd like to book the resort's helicopter tour, the private snorkeling excursion, and the sunset sailing trip. Alice made notes quickly. Of course, sir. Will anyone be joining you for these activities? Just me, Walter replied. I'm rediscovering the benefits of good company. After Alice left, Walter walked to the suite's panoramic windows and looked down at the resort's main pool area. He could see his family gathered around a table in the shade, their body language speaking volumes. Paige was on her phone, probably calling lawyers or Ivan Charles. Nathan was pacing, gesticulating wildly as he spoke to Rachel. Megan and Bobby sat slumped in their chairs, looking like children who'd just learned that Santa Claus wasn't real. Walter's phone rang. This time he answered. Mr. Rollins? The voice belonged to Dustin Thornton, his attorney. I received your message this morning. Are you ready to proceed with the documents we prepared? Yes, Walter said without hesitation. File everything. The divorce papers, the restraining order for Nathan's harassment, and the trust fund modifications for the children. And the business restructuring? Walter had spent months with Dustin, carefully crafting a legal strategy that would protect his assets while ensuring his family couldn't continue exploiting his generosity. The trust funds for Megan and Bobby would provide modest but reasonable support, enough for basic living expenses, but nowhere near the luxury they'd grown accustomed to. Proceed with all of it, Walter confirmed. How long until they're served? The process server is already en route to your hotel. They'll have the papers within the hour. After hanging up, Walter called his brother Randy Adams, who lived in Oregon and had watched the family dynamics with growing concern over the years. Walter, Randy's voice was warm but worried. I heard you were in Maui. How's the family vacation? Educational, Walter replied dryly. Randy, I need you to do something for me. Call Mom and Dad. Let them know what's happening before they hear it from Paige. Explain that I've finally reached my limit. Randy was quiet for a moment. Jesus, Walter. What did they do? Walter gave his brother a condensed version of the morning's events, focusing on the years of disrespect that had culminated in being told he'd ruin family photos. About damn time, Randy said firmly. Mom and Dad have been worried about how they treat you. Hell, we all have. You've been too generous for too long. I thought I was being a good provider. You were being a good doormat, Randy replied gently. There's a difference. You sure you're okay handling this alone? Walter looked around the penthouse suite, then out at the pristine beach where couples walked hand in hand and families played together with genuine affection. I'm not alone, he said. For the first time in years, I have exactly the company I want mine. That evening, Walter dined alone at the resort's most exclusive restaurant. The maitre d', obviously briefed on the situation, treated him with exceptional courtesy. The meal, fresh mahi-mahi with macadamia nut crust, was extraordinary, but more importantly, it was peaceful. As he finishing his dessert, Walter noticed movement at the restaurant's entrance. A process server was speaking with the hostess, clearly looking for someone. Walter raised his hand slightly, and the man approached his table. Walter Rollins? That's me. The server handed him an envelope. These are copies for your records, sir. The originals were delivered to your family's current location about 30 minutes ago. Walter accepted the papers calmly. Inside were copies of the divorce filing, restraining orders against Nathan and Ivan Charles, and modified trust fund documents that would drastically reduce his children's monthly allowances. He ordered a cognac, a bottle of Hennessy parody that cost $500 per glass, and raised it in a silent toast to the Pacific sunset. Tomorrow would bring consequences, reactions, and probably a great deal of drama. But tonight, Walter Rollins was exactly where he belonged, in control of his own life. Chapter 6. Consequences Cascade. Walter woke to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. He made coffee, settled onto his private terrace, and systematically reviewed the communications while watching the sunrise paint the ocean gold. The texts ranged from desperate pleas from Paige to furious accusations from Nathan to confused questions from Bobby. Megan's messages were the most revealing, a progression from anger to panic to bargaining as the reality of her situation sank in. The calls told a similar story. Paige's first message was conciliatory. Walter, we need to talk. I think there's been a misunderstanding. By the 10th call, her tone had shifted to desperate. Please call me back. We're at the Maui Budget Inn, and it's not appropriate for our family. Nathan's messages were predictably aggressive. This is financial abuse, Walter. You can't just abandon your responsibilities. But his final call revealed cracks in his bravado. Look, maybe I overstepped some boundaries. Can we discuss this like adults? Walter was halfway through his coffee when Glenn Porter called. Mr. Rollins, I hope I'm not disturbing you. We've had some incidents this morning that I thought you should know about. What kind of incidents? Your wife attempted to charge a suite to your account at approximately 6 a.m. When our staff explained that wouldn't be possible given your specific instructions, she became quite vocal. Security had to escort her from the property. Walter sighed. He'd hoped Paige would handle the situation with more dignity. I see. Anything else? Your brother-in-law tried to access your penthouse using a story about forgotten medication. Our security cameras show him trying to use a hotel phone to contact what appeared to be legal counsel. Nathan called lawyers from the hotel lobby? That's correct, sir. We have it on video if needed for any future proceedings. After hanging up, Walter called Gabriel Gregory, who answered on the first ring. Walter, I've been monitoring the situation. Your family has been busy this morning. How busy? Paige called Ivan Charles at 5:30 a.m. They had a lengthy conversation about accelerating their timeline. Nathan contacted 3 divorce attorneys, though none would take a case against you on such short notice. And your children, well, they're learning some hard lessons about credit card dependency. Walter had canceled their credit cards the previous evening, leaving them with only the cash they'd brought to Hawaii. For a family accustomed to unlimited spending, it was a harsh introduction to financial reality. There's something else, Gabriel continued. Ivan Charles booked a flight to Maui this morning. He lands at 2 p.m. This was unexpected, but not necessarily problematic. Walter had been prepared for Ivan's eventual involvement. Any word on where they're staying? The Maui Budget Inn, just like you predicted. Single rooms, no ocean view. Ivan booked the room next to your wife's. Walter felt a brief pang of something. Not quite sadness, but acknowledgement of an ending. 20 years of marriage, reduced to secret meetings at a roadside motel. His phone rang with a call from Dustin Thornton. Walter, We have developments. Paige hired Alex Savage from Honolulu to represent her. He's good, but he's not familiar with the Washington state trust structures we created. More importantly, she doesn't understand the extent of the financial reorganization. Explain. The house, the cars, the country club memberships, the children's college funds. Everything she considers theirs is actually controlled by the family trust you established. Since you're the sole trustee and beneficiary, she has no legal claim to any of it during divorce proceedings. Walter had spent years structuring his finances to protect his family from potential business liabilities. Ironically, those same protections now shielded his assets from his family. What about spousal support? She'll get something, but given the evidence of adultery and the prenuptial agreement she signed, it won't be substantial. Certainly not enough to maintain her current lifestyle. That afternoon, Walter treated himself to the resort's signature experience, a private helicopter tour of the island. As the aircraft lifted off from the resort's helipad, he looked down at the coastline where his family was presumably plotting their next move. From 1,000 feet above Maui, Walter's problems seemed remarkably small. The island spread beneath him in all its natural glory. Ancient volcanoes, pristine beaches, and tropical forests untouched by human drama. For 2 hours, he forgot about lawyers and process servers and bitter texts, losing himself in the simple pleasure of seeing the world from a new perspective. When he returned to the resort, Alice Eaton was waiting with an update. Mr. Rollins, I wanted to personally inform you of today's events. We've had multiple attempts by your family members to access resort services, all of which were politely declined per your instructions. We've also had several calls from journalists. Journalists, your daughter posted extensively on social media about the situation. She used terms like financial abuse and abandoned in paradise. Several gossip blogs picked up the story. Walter wasn't surprised. Megan's generation resolved everything through social media, often without considering consequences. How are you handling the inquiries? With complete discretion, sir. We neither confirm nor deny guest activities. However, I should mention that some of the social media posts have gained significant attention, and not all of it is sympathetic to your daughter's perspective. That evening, Walter dined alone again, this time at the resort's oceanfront sushi bar. The chef, Daryl Frank, prepared an omakase tasting that showcased the island's finest seafood. As Walter enjoyed each perfectly crafted piece, he reflected on the day's developments. His phone buzzed with a text from Randy, saw Megan's Instagram posts. Mom and Dad are horrified at how she's representing the family. Dad says you should have done this years ago. Walter smiled at his brother's message. His parents had always been uncomfortable with their grandchildren's sense of entitlement, but they'd never interfered with Walter's parenting choices. Now, seeing their granddaughter's public tantrum, they were finally expressing their real opinions. As the sun set over the Pacific, Walter allowed himself to imagine a different future. No more working 18-hour days to fund other people's dreams. No more walking on eggshells around his wife's moods. No more pretending not to notice his children's obvious lack of respect. Tomorrow, Ivan Charles would arrive in Maui, and the situation would become more complex. But tonight, Walter was content to sit alone at a sushi bar, appreciating expertly prepared food while watching waves crash against ancient lava rock. For the first time in decades, he was living his life on his own terms. Chapter 7. The Web Titans. Ivan Charles arrived at Kahului Airport looking like a man with a plan. Walter watched from the penthouse balcony as a black sedan, undoubtedly Ivan's, pulled into the parking lot of the Maui budget in 15 minutes down the coast. Through high-powered binoculars borrowed from the resort's concierge, Walter observed the reunion between his wife and her lover. Even from a distance, their body language spoke volumes. Paige threw herself into Ivan's arms with the desperation of a woman whose world was collapsing. Ivan held her, but his attention kept shifting to the modest motel around them, a far cry from the five-star accommodations he'd expected. Walter's phone buzzed with a text from Gabriel Gregory. Package delivered. Phase 2 is active. 20 minutes later, Walter's phone rang with a call from Ivan Charles himself. Walter, Ivan's voice carried false confidence. I understand you're having some family difficulties. Perhaps we should meet and discuss this situation like civilized adults. Ivan, Walter replied calmly. I'm surprised to hear from you. I thought you were focused on your Portland projects these days. There was a pause. Ivan clearly hadn't expected Walter to know about his location. I happen to be in the area on business, Ivan said carefully. Paige mentioned you'd had some kind of misunderstanding about the vacation arrangements. Walter laughed, not bitterly, but with genuine amusement. Misunderstanding? Is that what she called it? Ivan, let me ask you something. When you and Paige were planning your little rendezvous, did it occur to either of you that I might discover your affair? Another pause, longer this time. Walter, I think you're jumping to conclusions. Am I? Gabriel Gregory is a very thorough investigator, Ivan. He's documented your relationship quite extensively. Photos, credit card records, hotel registrations. Even some interesting recordings of conversations you thought were private. Walter could hear Ivan's breathing change. Good. Let him sweat. But here's the thing, Ivan. I don't actually care about your relationship with my wife. In fact, I'm grateful. You've helped me understand exactly where I stand with my family. Then what do you want? Walter had been waiting for this question. I want you to understand something very clearly. You've inserted yourself into my family's business, and that creates certain complications for your business interests. What kind of complications? Walter pulled out a folder of documents Gabriel had prepared, the fruits of months of investigation into Ivan's business practices. Well, there's the matter of the Henderson Creek project, Walter said conversationally. The environmental impact reports you filed with the state contain some interesting discrepancies. Ivan's voice became strained. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you do. You falsified wetland surveys to avoid costly mitigation requirements. Gabriel has the original reports from your surveyor, and they tell a very different story than what you submitted to the regulatory agencies. The silence stretched so long Walter wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Ivan spoke. What do you want, Walter? I want you to understand your position, Walter replied. You're currently staying at a budget motel with my soon-to-be ex-wife, pursuing a woman who has no access to the wealth you thought you were acquiring. Meanwhile, I have documentation of federal environmental crimes that could land you in prison for 5 to 10 years. You're bluffing. Walter opened his laptop and typed quickly. I just sent you an email, Ivan. Take a look. A minute passed before Ivan came back on the line, his voice barely above a whisper. How did you get these documents? I've been preparing for this conversation longer than you might imagine, Walter said. The question now is, what are you going to do with this information? What do you want from me? Walter smiled. He'd been hoping Ivan would ask that question. I want you to make a choice, Walter said. You can continue your relationship with Paige and face the full consequences of your business practices. Or you can end this affair, return to Portland, and hope I don't decide to share my information with federal environmental prosecutors. That's blackmail. No, Ivan. That's a consequence. You made choices, both personal and professional, and now you get to live with the results. After hanging up, Walter called room service and ordered a bottle of his favorite wine. Through the penthouse windows, he could see storm clouds gathering over the ocean. Tomorrow would bring rain to paradise, which seemed appropriate. His phone rang with a call from Paige. Walter, please, she began, her voice breaking. I haven't explained your conversation. This has gone far enough. Can we please just talk? About what, Paige? About saving our marriage. About working through this. About you continuing to live in my house, drive my cars, and spend my money while sleeping with another man? Paige was crying now. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Ivan said, he said you'd be reasonable, that we could work out some kind of arrangement. Walter closed his eyes, remembering the woman he'd married 20 years ago, the psychology student who wanted to help children, the woman who used to pack his lunch and kiss him goodbye every morning. Paige, he said gently, what happened to us? I don't know, she whispered. I don't know when everything changed. I do, Walter replied. It changed when you decided I was just a source of income instead of a partner. When you stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a provider. That's not true. Last night, you told me I'd ruin your family photos. Your family photos, Paige. Not our family photos. That's when I understood exactly how you see me. The silence stretched between them, filled with 20 years of memories and regrets. Is there any way back from this? Paige finally asked. Walter looked around the penthouse suite, then out at the storm clouds building over the Pacific. No, he said simply. There isn't. After ending the call, Walter poured wine and walked onto the private terrace. Lightning flickered in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to fall on the island paradise. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation. Tonight, he would watch the storm and plan his endgame. Chapter 8. The Final Gambit. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the island washed clean and gleaming under brilliant sunshine. Walter woke early and called a meeting he'd been planning since his arrival in Maui. At 10 a.m., the Penthouse Suites conference room hosted an unusual gathering. Glenn Porter represented the resort management. Dustin Thornton had flown in from Seattle overnight. Gabriel Gregory attended via video conference from his Portland office. And Alex Savage, Paige's hastily hired attorney, sat uncomfortably at the polished table. Gentlemen, Walter began, thank you for accommodating this meeting on short notice. I believe we can resolve several outstanding issues this morning. Alex Savage shifted nervously. He'd clearly expected a different kind of negotiation. Mr. Rollins, Alex began, my client is prepared to discuss reasonable terms for reconciliation. Walter held up a hand. There will be no reconciliation, Mr. Savage. This meeting is about consequences and clarity. He opened a folder and distributed identical packets to everyone present. These documents detail the financial reality of my family situation, Walter continued. As you'll see, Mrs. Rollins has no legal claim to any assets she considers hers. The house, cars, club memberships, and investment accounts are all held in trust structures that protect them from divorce proceedings. Alex Savage flipped through the papers, his face growing pale. These structures are ironclad. How long have you been planning this? Since the day I married her, Walter replied. I established these trusts to protect my family from potential business liabilities. I never imagined I'd need protection from the family itself. Dustin Thornton leaned forward. The prenuptial agreement your client signed specifically addresses adultery. Given the documented evidence of her relationship with Ivan Charles, spousal support will be minimal. What about the children? Alex asked desperately. Walter's expression softened slightly. Megan and Bobby will receive modified trust fund distributions, enough for basic living expenses, tuition, and reasonable accommodations. But their days of unlimited spending are over. Glenn Porter spoke for the first time. Mr. Rollins has also asked me to share information about recent events at our resort. Alex Savage looked confused. What events? Glenn produced a tablet showing security footage. Yesterday afternoon, your client and her companion attempted to use fraudulent credit cards to secure accommodations. When that failed, they created a public disturbance that required security intervention. Walter watched Alex Savage's face crumble as he realized his client had lied about several key facts. There's more. Gabriel Gregory's voice came through the video conference. Ivan Charles has decided to end his relationship with Mrs. Rollins. He returned to Portland this morning. The room fell silent. Walter had known Ivan would fold under pressure, but the speed of his departure was impressive even by coward standards. Where does this leave us? Alex asked weakly. Walter stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the resort grounds. Below, he could see his children sitting by the pool. Not the luxury pools of the Grand Wailea, but the small, basic pool at the budget invisible in the distance. It leaves you with a choice, Walter said without turning around. Your client can accept the divorce terms as presented, or she can fight a legal battle she cannot win while hemorrhaging money she doesn't have. And if she accepts, then she receives reasonable spousal support, keeps her jewelry and personal belongings, and maintains a modest lifestyle. The children complete their education with appropriate funding, and everyone moves forward with dignity. Walter turned back to the group, where she can continue making accusations of abandonment and abuse on social media, while living in budget motels with married men who flee at the first sign of consequences. Alex Savage closed his folder. I need to discuss this with my client. Of course, Walter agreed. You have until 5 p.m. today. After that, the offer expires, and we proceed with full litigation. After the others left, Walter remained alone in the conference room, looking out at the Pacific Ocean. His phone buzzed with a text from Randy. Mom called. She's proud of you for finally standing up for yourself. 20 minutes later, his phone rang with a call from Bobby. Dad. His son's voice was smaller than Walter had heard it in years. Can we talk? Just you and me. Walter felt his heart skip. Of course. Where are you? At the Budget Inn. Could you come here? I know you're mad at all of us, but I think I understand now. What we did. How we treated you. Walter looked around the penthouse suite. The luxury he'd bought but never enjoyed. The paradise his family had tried to steal from him. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. As Walter drove down the coastal highway toward the modest motel where his family was staying, he reflected on the events of the past few days. He'd set out to teach them a lesson about consequences, but somewhere along the way, the lesson had become something deeper. He wasn't just reclaiming his financial independence, he was reclaiming himself. The Maui Budget Inn looked exactly as he'd expected. Clean but basic, functional but far from luxurious. Bobby was waiting in the parking lot, looking younger than his 19 years. Dad, Bobby said as Walter approached. I'm sorry. For everything. For how I treated you. For calling you Pop, like it was some kind of joke. For thinking your money would always be there no matter how badly we acted. Walter studied his youngest child. What changed your mind? Bobby gestured toward the motel. Seeing Mom crying in a room that costs $60 a night. Watching Megan panic because her credit cards don't work. Realizing that Ivan ran away the moment things got difficult. He paused, understanding that you've been supporting all of us, and we repaid that by treating you like an embarrassment. Walter felt something loosen in his chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but possibility. What do you want from me, Bobby? I want to earn your respect back, Bobby said simply. I don't know how, but I want to try. And I want you to know that not all of us are like Mom and Megan. I still remember when you taught me to drive, when you came to my Little League games, when you helped me with math homework even after working 14-hour days. Walter looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw glimpses of the boy he'd raised before wealth and privilege had complicated everything. Are you willing to start over? Walter asked. No trust fund, no guaranteed support, no safety net except what you earn yourself. Bobby nodded without hesitation. Yes. I want to see if I can be someone you'd be proud to have as a son. Walter extended his hand, and Bobby shook it firmly. Then we'll start tomorrow, Walter said. Finish your semester at Stanford, then come work for me. You'll start at the bottom, construction crew, minimum wage, no special treatment. If you prove yourself, we'll talk about the future. For the first time in years, Bobby smiled at his father with genuine affection. Thank you, Dad, for not giving up on me completely. As Walter drove back to the Grand Wailea, he realized that this conversation with Bobby had been worth more than all the legal victories and financial maneuvering combined. He'd gotten his son back. Tomorrow would bring the final resolution with Paige and Megan. But tonight, he had reason to hope that something good might emerge from the wreckage of his family. Chapter 9. New Beginnings. The sun was setting over Maui as Walter sat in the penthouse suite's living room, reviewing the signed divorce agreement. Paige had accepted the terms without further negotiation. Perhaps Alex Savage had explained the futility of fighting, or perhaps she'd finally realized the depth of her predicament. The settlement was fair, but not generous. Modest spousal support for 5 years, enough to maintain a middle-class lifestyle, but nothing approaching the luxury she'd grown accustomed to. Megan would receive a reduced trust fund distribution sufficient for basic living expenses and completion of her education, contingent on maintaining employment or academic progress. Bobby's fund would continue as originally structured, but only after he demonstrated genuine commitment to rebuilding their relationship. A knock at the door interrupted Walter's review. He opened it to find Megan standing in the hallway, looking nothing like the entitled young woman who'd told him he'd ruined family photos just 5 days earlier. Dad, her voice was uncertain. Can I come in? Walter stepped aside, and Megan entered the suite with obvious awe. She'd probably never seen accommodations this luxurious. Ironic reminder of a lifestyle she'd taken for granted. "This is beautiful," she said quietly. "I never realized. I never thought about what you could afford when you weren't spending it on us." Walter gestured to the seating area. "What can I do for you, Megan?" She perched on the edge of an elegant chair, looking younger and more vulnerable than she had in years. "I wanted to apologize for what I said about the photos, for how I've treated you, for thinking you were just someone who existed to pay for my life." Walter studied his daughter's face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculated remorse. What he saw instead was genuine shame and confusion. "I talked to Bobby," Megan continued. "He told me about your conversation, about starting over. I was wondering, is it too late for me too?" "That depends," Walter replied. "What are you willing to do to earn back my trust?" Megan took a shaky breath. "Whatever it takes. I graduated with a business degree, but I've never actually worked. I've been living off your money and acting like I earned it. That stops now." She pulled out her phone and showed Walter the screen. "I deleted all the social media posts about this trip, the ones where I called you abusive and cruel. I posted an apology explaining that I was wrong, that I acted like a spoiled brat, and that you were teaching me a lesson I desperately needed to learn." Walter raised an eyebrow. Public accountability was not something he'd expected from Megan. "I also called Uncle Randy," she continued. "I asked if he knew of any entry-level jobs in his company. I told him I wanted to start at the bottom and work my way up without using your name or connections." Walter felt a flicker of hope. Randy's construction supply company was known for its demanding work environment and merit-based advancement. "And I called Grandma and Grandpa," Megan said, her voice breaking slightly. "I apologized for embarrassing the family name and promised to do better." Walter's parents had raised him with strong values about work, respect, and family loyalty. Their opinion mattered to him more than he'd admitted. "What did they say?" "Grandpa said I'd been acting like a spoiled little princess who forgot where her bread was buttered," Megan replied with a rueful smile. "Grandma was gentler, but she said I needed to find my way back to the girl they raised me to be." They sat in silence for several minutes, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. Finally, Walter spoke. "Your trust fund will be restructured," he said. "You'll receive a modest monthly allowance, enough to cover basic expenses while you establish yourself professionally. Additional distributions will be based on demonstrated responsibility and independence." Megan nodded eagerly. "I understand, and I accept that. I want to learn how to take care of myself." "There's one more thing," Walter said. "Your mother is struggling to understand how she ended up in this situation. She's going to need support as she adjusts to her new circumstances. Despite everything that's happened, she's still your mother." Megan's expression sobered. "I know. Bobby and I talked about that too. We're going to help her find an apartment back home, maybe help her get back into counseling work. She has a master's degree in psychology. She could have a career if she wanted one." Walter felt a complex mixture of emotions. Anger at years of being taken for granted, sadness at the end of his marriage, but also relief at finally seeing his children behave like adults. "Dad," Megan said quietly, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness right away, but I hope someday you might be proud of me again." Walter looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw past the entitled young woman to the little girl who used to bring him dandelions and demand bedtime stories. "I never stopped being proud of you, Megan," he said. "I was just disappointed in the choices you were making. There's a difference." Megan began to cry. Not the manipulative tears of someone trying to get their way, but the genuine sobs of someone finally understanding the cost of their actions. Walter handed her a tissue and sat quietly while she composed herself. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you go home and start building a life you can be proud of," Walter replied. "And I do the same." After Megan left, Walter walked onto the penthouse terrace one final time. Tomorrow he would fly back to Seattle, but not to the same life he'd left behind. He'd already made arrangements to sell the family house and move into a downtown penthouse. The country club membership would be canceled, the excess cars sold, the staff reduced. He would continue running Rollins Development, but with renewed focus and energy. Perhaps he'd take on some of the challenging projects he'd always been interested in, but never had time for. Maybe he'd travel, learn new things, meet new people. His phone buzzed with a text from Glenn Porter. "Mr. Rollins, it's been an honor hosting you. The entire staff wishes you well in your new beginning." Walter smiled and typed back, "Thank you for everything, Glenn. This week has been exactly what I needed." As he packed his belongings, Walter reflected on the events of the past 5 days. He'd come to Maui as a man whose family saw him as nothing more than a source of funding. He was leaving as someone who'd reclaimed his dignity, self-respect, and control over his life. The divorce would be final in 6 months. The children would have to prove themselves worthy of his continued support. The house where he'd felt increasingly like a stranger would be sold to someone who might actually appreciate it. But tonight, Walter Rollins was simply a man sitting in a penthouse suite in paradise, watching the stars emerge over the Pacific Ocean and planning the first day of the rest of his life. For the first time in decades, the future felt full of possibilities instead of obligations. And that, he realized, was worth more than all the family photos in the world. Epilogue. 6 months later, Walter stood in his new downtown Seattle penthouse, reviewing architectural plans for a community center his company was donating to build in a low-income neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was giving away more money than ever, but to people who truly needed it rather than those who simply expected it. Bobby worked construction during the day and attended night classes in business management, earning both his father's respect and his own self-confidence. Megan had started as a receptionist at Randy's company and worked her way up to assistant project manager, discovering she had inherited her father's head for business. Paige had moved to a modest apartment and was working as a counselor at a community mental health center, slowly rebuilding the career she'd abandoned years earlier. They spoke occasionally, polite, distant conversations about their children's progress. Ivan Charles was facing federal environmental charges. Walter had ultimately decided that some consequences were bigger than personal revenge. The penthouse felt like home in a way the family mansion never had. It was a space filled with his choices, designed around his preferences. And when Bobby and Megan visited, which they did regularly now, they came to see him, not his wallet. Walter poured himself a glass of wine and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Somewhere out, there was Maui, the island where he'd learned the difference between being needed and being valued. His phone buzzed with a text from Gabriel Gregory. "Saw the article in Seattle Business Journal about your community center project. Your parents will be proud." Walter smiled and typed back, "They raised me right. It just took me a while to remember." As the Seattle skyline glittered in the darkness, Walter Rollins reflected on the most expensive vacation of his life. 7 days in paradise had cost him a marriage, most of his family relationships, and hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. It had also given him back something far more valuable, himself. And that, he thought as he raised his glass to the city lights, was the best investment he'd ever made. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.